The sound of my daughter's knee hitting the hardwood floor was not the worst part of that night. The worst part was the silence that followed, thick and suffocating, like a verdict being handed down without a single word spoken. 20-some adults sat frozen around that Christmas table, forks suspended in midair, eyes deliberately avoiding what had just happened in front of all of them. My father had shoved my 9-year-old daughter to the floor because she had walked toward a chair he had decided did not belong to her. Not a gentle nudge, not a warning hand, but a deliberate, forceful shove from a grown man onto a child whose only crime was following a paper place card that someone else had made and set down for her. My name is Lee. I am a single mother, which means I have spent years perfecting exactly 2 skills: pretending I am fine when I am not, and carrying far more than any one person should ever have to carry alone. I had been doing both of those things for as long as I could remember, especially inside that house, especially around that family, especially at Christmas. The dining room looked exactly the way it always did during the holidays, like someone had ransacked a seasonal catalog and then argued with a nutcracker. Garland on every surface, candles that smelled like pine resin and false promises, and matching sweaters that my sister Chelsea had insisted everyone wear. Hers was adorable, naturally. Mine looked like a consolation prize. My daughter Macy kept pulling the sleeves of hers down over her hands because she was 9 years old, and the sweater had been made for what Chelsea had described as a petite angel, which was a polite way of saying it was not designed with my child in mind. At the head of the table, my father held court the way he always did, fork like a scepter, laugh loud and self-satisfied, radiating the particular kind of confidence that belongs to men who have never once been made to answer for anything. Chelsea's daughter Poppy sat in the seat closest to him, the seat that everyone in that family treated like sacred ground, the seat that came with the best plate and the first refill and the unspoken message that some grandchildren counted more than others. Poppy was 5 years old, blonde curls, wide eyes, and a talent for getting exactly what she wanted with a single dramatic sigh. Everyone called her Grandpa's girl, as though belonging to someone were a title you could win through the right combination of genetics and charm. Macy had been watching all of it with the careful, measured expression of a child who has learned to read a room long before she ever learned to read a book. That quality in her made me simultaneously proud and heartbroken in a way that I could never fully explain to anyone who had not raised a child in difficult circumstances. My father had started the evening with one of his little remarks, the kind he always delivered with a smile, so that he could later claim it was just a joke. When I walked through the door, he said, "Well, look who made it," in the tone of a man surprised to see someone show up somewhere they were not truly wanted. I smiled because that is what I had been trained to do. Smile, make it easy, do not give him a reason, do not make it worse, do not ruin dinner. He moved on to jokes at the table about blood being thicker than eggnog, lifting his glass toward Chelsea like they were sharing a private language, and everyone laughed on cue, Chelsea too loudly, my mother too quietly, and Aunt Linda with the enthusiasm of someone being paid by the reaction. Macy did not laugh. She kept her hands folded in her lap with the stillness of a child who has learned that laughter can be used as a weapon against you. Chelsea had made the place cards herself, decorated with glitter, written in her careful handwriting. She had placed Macy's card at the special seat, which in retrospect feels like the universe setting up a scene it had already written the ending to. Macy walked toward the table with a small, hopeful smile on her face. She was not trying to take anything from anyone. She was 9 years old and she wanted to sit down and be included, the way children want things before the world teaches them that belonging must be earned and can always be revoked. My father saw the card. He saw Macy's hand reaching for the chair. Something shifted in his face with the speed and ugliness of a door slamming shut. "That seat is for my real grandkid," he barked, and then before anyone could process what was happening, he shoved her. Her foot caught the edge of the rug. Her knee hit the hardwood with a sound that landed in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. The silence that came after was not the comfortable kind. It was the kind that has weight, the kind that implicates everyone who sits inside it without speaking. I was moving before I consciously decided to move. I helped Macy up and felt how tense her small body was, vibrating with shock, her breath coming in tiny, uneven bursts, her fingers gripping my sleeve like it was the only solid thing in the room. I looked around at every adult at that table, and not one of them stood up. Not one person said a word in her defense. Not one person reached toward my child, not even my own mother. My ears were ringing. My vision had narrowed to a single sharp point of clarity, and into that clarity came one thought, clean and cold and absolute. This ends tonight. I leaned down close to Macy and said quietly, "I have got you," because I needed at least one adult in that room to say something true to her. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I had been carrying for days, telling myself I would wait until after the holidays, telling myself I could get through one more dinner, telling myself I owed them that consideration. I set the folder on the table between the cranberry sauce and every lie my family had ever told me. I looked at my father and then at my mother, and I said 4 words. "You have been served." My father's hand went to the folder the way his hands always went to things in that house, as though they belonged to him by default. He flipped it open. His eyes moved across the first page, and the color drained from his face with the specific pallor of recognition. Not anger, not indignation, but the pale of a man who understands that what he thought was safely buried has just been placed in front of him in a room full of witnesses. My mother's wine glass slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a sharp, ugly sound before tipping over. I did not wait to watch what happened next. I walked out of that house with my daughter, and for the first time all evening, the silence behind us broke, not with comfort or concern, not with anyone asking if Macy was all right, but with panic. To understand why I had that folder in my bag, you need to understand what my life had looked like inside that family for as long as I could remember. Growing up, Chelsea was sunlight and I was weather. Chelsea was praised and I was corrected. Chelsea heard "you are such a star," and I heard "do not be so sensitive." Chelsea was invited closer, and I was told I was in the way. My father's preferred method of cruelty was to deliver it smiling, to say the cutting thing in a tone that made it a joke, so that everyone around him could laugh out of self-preservation, and he could never be held accountable for any of it. When I was a teenager, he would ask in front of people where I got my hair, suggesting with a grin that the mailman might know the answer. Everyone laughed the way people laugh when they are terrified of becoming the next target. My mother's response was always the same silent look that meant "do not start, do not make this worse, do not ruin dinner." Chelsea became my father's proof that his marriage was sound, proof that he was not being made a fool of, proof that he was the kind of man who could produce a real daughter. I became his question mark, and rather than resolve the question with a simple test, he chose to punish me for the uncertainty and call it something righteous. My grandfather, my father's father, was the only person on that side of the family who had ever made me feel like I genuinely belonged. He was not a warm man in the conventional sense. He was old school, the kind of man who believed emotions were for people who did not have enough work to do. But he would pat my shoulder and tell me I was smart and that I should not let anyone dull that. He would slip a card into my hand on my birthday with a crisp bill inside, and then loudly tell Chelsea to stop spending money like it was a hobby. When he died, the family did not grieve so much as reorganize around ownership. My father assumed control of everything, all the papers and accounts and decisions, and I was told very casually by my mother, eyes fixed on the kitchen counter, voice flat as a script, that there was nothing set aside for me. I believed her, or I tried to, because the alternative was accepting that my parents could look at me and decide I was not worth the truth. 2 weeks before that Christmas, Chelsea asked me to watch Poppy for an hour while she took a work call. Chelsea works from home in the same way that I do yoga when I occasionally stretch for the remote, but I said yes because Poppy is 5 years old, and she likes me in the uncomplicated way that small children like adults who do not make them audition for affection. I also said yes because I was still carrying that old family disease, the one that whispers that if you are useful enough, if you are helpful enough, they will eventually decide you are worth treating decently. Chelsea left. The house was quiet. Poppy played with her dolls, and I cleaned up wrapping paper because apparently my designated role in that family was helper rather than person. Chelsea's laptop sat closed and asleep on the coffee table, entirely none of my business. Poppy, however, regarded it the way small children regard anything shiny and forbidden, and she flipped it open with the casual authority of someone who had done it many times before. A password box appeared, and Poppy typed the password with tiny, serious fingers from memory, like it was her own name. Children do not know passwords unless someone has let them, and the fact of it stopped me cold. I walked over and said gently that it was not a toy and reached to close it. That was when the laptop woke up fully, and a PDF filled the screen as though it had been waiting, and at the top of that document in bold letters was my grandfather's name. I sat down, not out of nosiness, but because my body understood something before my brain caught up. I skimmed fast and carefully, the way you read when you are afraid of what you will find but more afraid of what you already suspect. There were official headings, trust documents, beneficiary lists. My throat tightened. And then I saw my full legal name, not a nickname, not a maybe, my name, printed clean and undeniable. I scrolled further to a page titled Distribution Summary, and one line reached off the screen and grabbed me by the throat. It corresponded to a date I knew in my bones, the month I had asked my parents for help with a deposit on a safer apartment after my home had been broken into, the month my father had laughed and told me I should have made better choices, the month my mother had shrugged and said they could not help. That same month Chelsea had announced she was so blessed and purchased a new SUV. I stared at that line until the numbers blurred. Then I did the only smart thing I have ever managed to do inside that family. I took one photograph. Clear, deliberate, capturing the trust name, my name, and the part that mattered most. Then I closed the laptop, and when Poppy asked if she could watch cartoons, I smiled at her like my entire world had not just shifted on its axis and told her to pick one. 2 days later, I sat across from a lawyer named Rebecca Shaw in an office that smelled like coffee and competence and slid my phone across the desk. Rebecca studied the photograph for 5 seconds, and her expression changed in the specific way of someone who has seen this pattern before and knows exactly what it means. "If your name is on it," she said, voice calm and steady, "trustees do not get to decide, you do not count." She told me that ink beats opinions, and that family rumor is not a legal defense. I did not call my parents. I did not confront Chelsea. I did not attempt to clear the air or give anyone the opportunity to prepare a story. I let Rebecca work quietly, and when she handed me a completed folder a few days later, I did not open it dramatically in the parking lot. I sat in my car and stared at it like it was a bomb, because it was, not the destructive kind but the life-changing kind, and I was not yet sure I was ready for my life to change. That folder lived in my bag for days. I took it out and put it back. Took it out and put it back. I told myself to wait until after the holidays, to not do it at Christmas, to not do it in front of everyone, to not be dramatic, to not ruin things, to get through one more dinner the way I had always gotten through one more dinner. And then my father put his hands on my child, and waiting stopped being a choice I was willing to make. The drive home was quiet in the way that frightens parents, the specific silence of a child's mind trying to build meaning around something that should never have happened to them. Macy's knee was already swelling. She was trying not to cry, holding it in with the discipline of a child who has learned that showing pain makes adults uncomfortable, and that making adults uncomfortable has consequences. I kept my voice gentle. I told her to look at me. I told her she had done nothing wrong. She stared out the window for a long moment and then said, "He does not like me." My throat tightened so hard I could barely form the words. I told her that was about him and not about her. Her voice got smaller. "Is it because I am not real?" There it was, the poison passed down like an heirloom already in my daughter's mouth. I pulled the car over. I needed my hands steady for what I was about to say. "No," I told her, and I made the word a wall, something she could stand behind. "You are real. You belong with me always." She nodded like someone who wanted to believe something, but had not yet decided it was safe to. I drove the rest of the way home with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. The folder was a court petition demanding a full accounting of my grandfather's trust, every dollar in and every dollar out, every signature and every transfer, with a request to freeze further distributions until the complete picture was documented, and an argument to remove my parents as trustees on the grounds that what I had found was not confusion or clerical error, but deliberate diversion. It included exhibits. My name on the trust. Distribution lines that matched the sudden financial blessings in Chelsea's life. The trust administrator's information so that nobody could dismiss it as fabrication. That was why my father went pale when he opened it. He recognized exactly what it was because he knew exactly what he had done, and he had presumably believed I would never find out. My phone began ringing before I pulled into my driveway. Chelsea first, then my mother, then my father, over and over in succession. Chelsea's voicemail was half fury and half panic, demanding to know what I had done and informing me I was ruining everything. My mother's was a sobbing whisper asking me, please, please, think about this, as though I had not been thinking about my daughter's knee on hardwood from the moment it happened. My father's voicemail was cold and controlled, no theatrics, just a quiet declaration that I was not taking anything from this family. I did not call any of them back. I got Macy settled on the couch in comfortable clothes, pressed an ice pack to her knee, and made cocoa with extra marshmallows because sometimes the most important thing a parent can do is put sugar between a child and their pain. We watched a Christmas movie with her tucked into my side like she was bracing herself against a world that had already shoved her once that evening. The family group chat erupted. Aunt Linda wanted to know how I could do this on Christmas. A cousin I barely knew messaged to ask if I was all right. Chelsea posted photographs of Poppy sitting in the special seat with a cheerful caption as though nothing had happened. And then Chelsea posted something on social media about people who destroy families for money. No names attached, just enough specificity for everyone in the family to know exactly who she meant, and people reacted with heart emojis as though betrayal were an inspirational sentiment. My father sent one text, calculated and precise, the kind of message a person keeps in reserve for the moment it will cause maximum damage. He wrote that if I wanted a court to decide whether I deserved my grandfather's inheritance, perhaps the court should also hear why I thought I was entitled to it when I might not even be his. My stomach flipped, not because I believed the implication, but because I understood what he was doing. He was not defending money. He was defending his lifelong right to punish me, and he was going to try to drag my daughter into it as well. I stared at the message until my hands stopped shaking. Then I looked at Macy asleep on the couch, and I whispered to her and to myself that he did not get to write our story anymore. 2 days after Christmas, Rebecca forwarded me a document from my parents' attorney. They were seeking dismissal of my petition on the grounds of bad faith and harassment and asking the court to sanction me. The word sanction landed in my chest like a cold hand. I could practically hear my father narrating it, telling everyone that even the judge could see I was being dramatic. Rebecca called me before I could fully process what I had read, her voice calm in the particular way of someone who has watched this story play out before and already knows how it ends. She told me they were going to try to make the case about my biological relationship to my father. She told me not to take the bait. I asked her whether we should pursue a paternity test. There was a pause just long enough for an old, familiar shame to begin crawling up my throat. Then Rebecca said, "Not for court, not for them. Your name is on the trust and trustees have legal obligations they cannot dissolve based on private suspicion." When I came in to meet with her that afternoon, she slid a printed page across the desk. It was an initial snapshot from the trust administrator. The trust principal at my grandfather's death had been $480,000. The intended split was 50% for me and 50% for Chelsea. My share had been $240,000. The current trust balance was $38,000. I sat back in my chair as though I had been pushed. Rebecca tapped the bottom of the page and said, "Now we show the court how it happened." She slid another page across the desk, a partial distribution summary, just the highlights. She said, enough to tell the story. I saw where my life had gone, not poetically but in line items. Chelsea's down payment, a vehicle purchase, medical expenses, education costs, category after category labeled with the language of family support, while I was being told there was nothing set aside for me. The month I had needed help with an apartment deposit after a break-in, the month my father laughed and my mother shrugged, that same month appeared in the distribution records with Chelsea's name attached to a sum that would have changed everything for me. I heard my own voice when I spoke, too controlled, too steady, the voice I used when I was afraid that if I let the emotion out it would drown me entirely. Rebecca did not offer me sympathy. She handed me the truth like a tool and told me they had taken money that was earmarked for me and spent it like a family slush fund. My phone buzzed while I was still sitting in her office. Aunt Linda asking why I was doing this to my father. I looked at the message and laughed, a single sharp sound, because sure, Linda, I was the one doing something here, not the people who had moved hundreds of thousands of dollars like it was their own personal account. The first hearing was a preservation hearing, the kind where you ask the court to freeze records and stop anyone from moving money while the full picture is assembled. Rebecca asked for two things, and the judge granted both, ordering the complete file of statements and transfer records and trustee approvals to be produced by a set deadline. My father's jaw tightened. Chelsea's eyes moved to him. My mother stared at the table as though she had practiced that particular posture her entire life. When Macy asked me that evening if we were in trouble, I told her we were safe, and I meant it, and I made sure she could hear that I meant it. The paperwork arrived the way consequences arrive, steadily and without mercy. A week later, Rebecca sent me a single message asking me to come in immediately. She placed one page on the desk and told me to look at the approvals column. I scanned down through signatures and initials and authorizations, and then my eyes found my mother's handwriting. Not once, multiple times. My stomach dropped through the floor. I had believed, or I had allowed myself to believe, that my father was the architect of this, and my mother was simply too weak to stop him. But she had signed. She had known. She had authorized it. She had looked at me over years of holidays and dinners and phone calls in which she told me there was nothing set aside, and she had known the entire time. The next hearing was the final one. My parents' attorney made one last attempt to redirect the case toward biology. Rebecca did not engage with it. She stated simply that my name was on the trust, that trustees had duties they had demonstrably violated, that the signatures proved intent, and that family rumor was not a legal defense in any jurisdiction. The judge gave his decision without ceremony. My share was $240,000. My parents were ordered to repay it in full, plus interest, plus my legal costs, plus court-imposed penalties, totaling $368,000. My father looked stunned in the way people look when they have been so long accustomed to immunity that accountability feels like an ambush. Chelsea went stiff. My mother did not move at all. I did not feel victorious. I felt lighter, the way you feel when your body finally releases something it has been clenching for years, and then you realize you do not know how to stand without the tension you built your posture around. The paternity kit arrived in a plain cardboard box a few weeks before the final hearing, mailed by my parents' attorney like a dare, like a threat, like a last resort. Rebecca had told me not to touch it, not for court, not for them. Do not let them drag you into the mud and call it truth. I had listened. I had let the paperwork do what paperwork does. But after the case was decided, after the verdict was in, the box was still sitting on my dresser, and my father's voice was still in my head. Real grandkid, real family, real. I stared at it until I understood that I was not doing it for anyone else. I was doing it because I was tired of carrying doubt like it had always been part of my inheritance. I opened the box. My father's sample was already inside, submitted by his attorney as part of his own strategy, which almost made me laugh in the way that is not funny, but is instead the sound of a person recognizing the limits of audacity. I swabbed, sealed the envelope, and mailed it back without ceremony or ritual or any attempt to make the moment mean something. The result came on a Tuesday in an email I opened alone at my kitchen counter. I read it once, twice, 3 times, waiting for the words to arrange themselves differently. Biological match. He is my father. My first response was not relief. It was a clean, cold fury because it meant the suspicion had always been wrong and the cruelty had always been deliberate. It meant they could have ended my entire childhood differently with 1 test and 1 ounce of decency, and they had chosen not to because they did not want clarity. They wanted a reason. I sent the results to both of my parents without a message, without an explanation, without any invitation for a response. Just the truth, arriving after a lifetime of them withholding it. Then I blocked both of them. A week later, my doorbell rang, and I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing on my porch alone, hands clasped in front of her like someone who had rehearsed the posture of remorse without fully committing to the substance of it. Macy was at school. I opened the door just enough to signal that I was listening, not welcoming. My mother's eyes were swollen in a tired way, not dramatic, just the face of someone who has been losing an argument with her own reflection. She did not begin with an apology. She began with a strategy, telling me my father had changed, that he wanted to see Macy, that now that we knew, we could be a family. Now that we know. As though love were a subscription that activates once the laboratory confirms eligibility. Then the truth came out the way it always does after years of silence, messy and too late, in the wrong direction on the wrong porch at the wrong time. She told me that before I was born she had slept with someone else, just once, and that my father had found out or had suspected, and from that moment on he had decided I might not be his, and she had let him treat me as a question mark because she felt guilty and believed she deserved his punishment, and somehow I had ended up paying for it instead. She told me now they could fix it. I waited until she finished. Then I told her no. I told her it should never have mattered, that she had been my mother regardless of whose daughter I was, and that she had chosen him over me anyway. I told her my father did not get to have a relationship with Macy now simply because a test said real. I told her she did not get to return because the story had become comfortable again. I told her the only thing she was leaving with was the knowledge that she had been wrong about all of it. Then I closed the door. 4 months later the money arrived. All of it, the full $368,000, wired directly to my account. My parents had sold their house, the house my father used to call his legacy, the one they had owned outright, the one that had been the backdrop to every Christmas dinner and every small cruelty and every silence. The sale covered the full judgment. Every dollar that had been taken from me, every dollar the court had added on top. When the transfer cleared, I did not cry and I did not celebrate. I paid off what needed paying, established something real and solid for Macy's future, and closed the door on everything else. My parents are broke now, not in a budgeting sense, but in the quiet, downsized, borrowed sense, the kind of broke where people stop calling and excuses stop landing. We are no contact, not the dramatic, announced kind, the peaceful kind, the kind that exists simply because I stopped opening the door. Macy laughs more now. She sleeps through the night. She has stopped asking about real. She knows exactly where she belongs, and she does not need anyone's confirmation to feel it. I do not flinch when my phone buzzes. I do not spend the days before holidays bracing myself. Our life is smaller in certain measurable ways and so much larger in every way that actually matters. They lost the money. They lost the house. They lost the story they had been telling about themselves and everyone in it. And I got my life back, and more importantly, I got to give my daughter hers.